I was fortunate enough to play Assassin's Creed Shadows for 4 hours, and here's everything you need to know about the upcoming release, what to expect, and maybe I have a surprise for you later on too. The demo included a prologue that we were not allowed to record, and then about 3 hours in the open world where we were free to do whatever we wanted, though there was a questline we were encouraged to do. Let's start with the usual tidings, which are laying out biases. I love Assassin's Creed, I've always loved it, even during the RPG era, and I was given a form of special treatment from Ubisoft in the sense that while I was unable to attend the in-person event for the game, I was able to play this remotely. Aside from that, you'll also need to remember that I generally love open world games, especially ones with good stealth and movement, so there's a high likelihood that this will be up my alley. This video will be structured into 2 parts. The first will cover my thoughts on the preview I played and if it changed my reluctantly hopeful anticipation, and the second half of the video will be doing my best to answer questions that you guys submitted to me on Twitter. Let's start with something easy, which is playing as Naoe or Yasuke. You may notice a lot of my gameplay features Naoe, and that's for a pretty big reason. It's because Yasuke is not a sneaky fella. My favorite parts of the Assassin's Creed series have always been the stealth and parkour, so a character that can barely do either of those has little appeal to me. I did play a little bit as him for the sake of trying it out, but even the combat, which is generally easier as Yasuke, was more fun as Naoe because her animations and different weapons were more varied and unique than Yasuke's. I don't care that he's a samurai, and I don't care that he's black, but I do care that his gameplay, to me, just didn't click as well as Naoe's. And this shockingly included combat. It makes the game's biggest feature, the 2 protagonists, feel a little redundant, as if having a samurai is an obligation because it's set in Japan. The difference between the 2 is most notable in animations, and I'm happy to say that set animations and the general presentation of the game this time around is exceptional. I was disappointed in Mirage's movement because a supposedly nimble character moved like a 300-pound Viking. So to see Yasuke move as if he truly is wearing 100 pounds of armor, and to see Naoe move like a proper ninja, both in terms of their actual speed but also in the way that they carry themselves, was a massive step up. It's more than Yasuke failing to scramble a wall or him botching a leap of faith. It's about his walk, the way he struggles a little to get on a horse, the way he stumbles a bit getting off, and the way the ironclad cloth has clearly heavier physics than Naoe's. They are minor details, but they go so far in developing the 2 as separate characters, and when everything from the minor details to the major differences are thought out, it lends a lot to replayability and the idea that these are 2 entirely different people. It can also add to the fun a whole lot. Slicing an enemy a few times in combat is satisfying, I won't deny that, but it gets so much better when the finisher sees you taking their head off, and I have no idea if I can even show this. And the same applies to parkour. At first I thought the excessive flips Naoe does was a little much, but when you're actually in the game, it's so much fun because it's simply badass. This suspension of realism also applies to Naoe's speed, as this lady hauls ass across the map, and while yes, it might look a little much again, I can't complain because it fulfills the ninja shinobi assassin fantasy, whilst also being convenient in gameplay. If I'm running around in stealth trying to execute a plan, I want to play as a character that moves quickly. Speaking of movement, let's get into it. Naoe is the parkour specialist, so most of this discussion will be in regards to her, and essentially, it's the same as Mirage with some important tweaks. The biggest is that you need specific handholds in order to grab something. You will no longer be able to dig your Viking fingers into the side of any cliff face, and this made ascending structures something I had to think about a little bit more. And it made escapes or infiltrations take a bit more thought, though this is slightly invalidated by the next major movement update, and that's the return of the grappling hook. Functionally, it's the same grappling hook from Syndicate, so it felt familiar, and of course Naoe climbs it with considerable speed, but now she can swing with it, climb up or down on it, and there's more utility for it this time around. When we think about Syndicate, we think about how the environment necessitated the grappling hook, notably because the buildings were tall and the streets were wide. But here, it's more necessary for traversing the more traditional Japanese architecture that would otherwise be inaccessible, and I never felt entirely reliant on it, which is important when there's a tool that runs a serious risk of nullifying a core aspect of the game. The actual parkour that is here is improved for 2 reasons. The first is that the climbing is actual climbing, and the second is that there is room for that climbing to be useful. Let's unpack what I mean about the first one. When you play some of the games, especially in the RPG era, it can feel like instead of climbing up a wall, you're more so jumping up that wall. And I appreciated that in both Mirage and this game, there was significantly more scrambling, which goes a long way for immersion and fulfilling the assassin fantasy. Another thing people had an issue with when it came to the later entries is that when jumping from post to post, players noted a sharp drop in momentum. This makes sense and aligns with what we would see in real life. However, It appears this stop-and-go feeling is less a means of finding precision and transferring momentum, and instead a clear end of one animation and the beginning of another. It's a minor issue, and it appears I'm making a mountain of a molehill, but if you've played the games, then you know that having these animations blended is critical for creating flow in the movement. You can see here when running along the trees how the strange geometry of the tree causes some of this stop and go, despite the assumption being that you could skip over the gap reliably without losing momentum. And this perfectly leads to another issue with parkour, which is the lack of momentum. This was an issue in Mirage 2. Essentially, once climbing up on something or doing any move that would assumedly lose the player momentum, the game would either take you out of your sprinting state or force Bassam to start again at a leisurely jog before getting into a proper hustle. This, when combined with areas that saw a lot of climbing and general parkour, meant that players were sometimes consistently out of their sprint state. Couple this with being unable to always discern if they were in a sprint state or not upon climbing up, and we have the perfect problem. Fortunately, there is also a perfect solution present in both games. The recent games allow you to map the controls freely, so you can map the sprint to be R2 and have it activated by holding R2 instead of toggling it. This makes the movement more reminiscent of the high-profile and low-profile system of Days Gone. However, it's a remedy to a problem that ideally shouldn't exist in the first place. Another issue that was present in the last few games was the lack of side and back ejects. I won't go into the whole spiel about what it means for player expression, but the point is, many wanted to see its return, and it did in some ways return in Mirage, so I was hoping to have it here too, and alas, it isn't. There is an eject, but it's only really used to descend and not to ascend, which to me makes it not a true back eject. In spite of my disappointment, I will admit that there was not one instance in my demo where I thought, damn, a back eject or a side eject would be great here. This was a stance I held throughout the RPG series too. If I'm traversing the desert or climbing rocks as a Viking, I don't miss the ejects because there isn't really room to use them. In Mirage, because the level design lent itself to those tools, their exclusion was felt at all times. I think here, it's not quite a big deal, but to see it added in a future update just for fun would be nice, especially because parkour here is a lot of fun. This is of course aided by the flips and new animations, but with how slick everything feels, I was able to look past the blemishes and was more than capable of having fun. Let's shift to combat, which considering that they have a whole character design for it, has a lot riding on it. I always liked the Assassin's Creed combat, but it always operated secondary to stealth, which nullified any lofty expectations I could place upon it. But Shadows does not get that same luxury, and unfortunately, the combat was both fun, yet disappointing. Let's start with the difficulty, because there's an interesting dynamic here that I don't necessarily want to criticize, but do want to mention. Difficulty primarily comes from health bars and fights being a test of endurance instead of a proper test of reaction time. Combos are all telegraphed heavily, movesets are limited, and the timing and parrying for different dodges are Jesus levels of forgiving. I'll mention quickly that my gameplay doesn't represent that sentiment because of a laundry list of excuses including playing remotely with some input delay, playing at 10 FPS because of said remote play, and being generally in a very shitty headspace on the day of my demo unrelated to the event taking place, so feel free to take what I say with a grain of salt. But I'm sure others are going to mention this too. Aside from that, I generally found combat to be the standard fare of slamming enemies and parrying attacks to build your resolve meter, which would allow you to execute your special attacks. Said special attacks are flashy, feel like they have impact, and from a visual standpoint, are the bread and butter of the combat, but otherwise, the combat is relatively unchanged from Valhalla. This isn't to say it's not still fun, but it doesn't justify itself as being the basis for an entire character's playstyle. There's also another issue with combat, and that is, it's more fun as Naoe. Yasuke, for as much as he is brutal and busting through doors is fun, he isn't much aside from a tank that is enticing entirely through how much damage he absorbs, which reduces already simplistic combat to being even more simple, as attacks are hardly punishing. Naoe does less damage with the benefit of speed, and can only take 2 or 3 hits, so you have to be considerate of every move, making combat through fragility alone more engaging and in my case, more fun. Also, you guys know I'm an animation nut, and the flips and kicks Naoe pulls off makes the combat way more visceral, and the few abilities I was able to try had, simply put, way more sauce than what Yasuke provided. This is why I mentioned that Yasuke at times felt like an obligation. I think it operates in tandem with another subconscious feeling with this game, which is that undeniable elephant-sized samurai in the room, Ghost of Tsushima. The impact of Ghost of Tsushima is present all over the game, and I'm not going to pretend like it's a bad thing. It clearly pushed Ubisoft to not just make this game more unique, but to try and meet the bar that Tsushima set. Does it meet that bar? I think so. But this feeling, seeing all the particle effects, the more nature-centric side quests, and the samurai bring to mind a game that is as much a response to Tsushima as it is a companion to it. I don't think Ubisoft's intentions were to make a Tsushima ripoff, and it doesn't feel like that, but it's clear that there is an expectation. Maybe the team felt like a game in feudal Japan without a samurai would be a wasted opportunity, which, fair enough. But that, I feel, is exactly the problem. The only appeal to this character is playing as a samurai, which sure, is cool, but the entire appeal of the series is playing as an assassin. Maybe I'm nuts, but why would I want to not play as the assassin in the game within a series about assassins? Sure, this question could be posed to Odyssey, Valhalla, and Origins, but the difference there is functionally, I can still assassinate, sneak, climb, but as a samurai, I can't do any of those. So what's the point? Fortunately, I was told that a large majority of the game could be played as Naoe, so for people like me that don't really care for Yasuke's playstyle, then you can avoid most of it. This was especially appreciated because I prefer the stealth approach whenever given the opportunity. I'm gonna say something bold, but I think the stealth in this game, from what I've played thus far, might be the best it's been, arguably ever. The stealth was so much fun for one major reason, and that's that each action needs to be thought out. There's one example I love thinking about, and it's where I was approaching a long hallway with two enemies facing each other. I wasn't sure how to get past them without being spotted, so I quickly threw a kunai at the lamp, leaving the first guard in darkness, quickly taking him out with the hidden blade before he could react, and then sniping the next guard from the shadows. It doesn't sound like much, but I am not kidding when I say that I can't remember the last time stealth required this much thought from me in Assassin's Creed. Is that a little sad? Maybe. But the point is that the stealth here was an excellent change of pace, and I severely hope these mechanics are not gimmicks exclusive to this game. You might be wondering why the game is called Assassin's Creed Shadows, and the answer is that when within the shadows, you're invisible. This means tactically waiting for night is an important part of the stealth process, and that taking out light sources, especially at night or indoors, will be crucial to your success. Usual tools like eagle vision and whistling are back, but there are added tools like the ability to pull a guard with a grappling hook and the ability to hang from the ceiling with the grappling hook and drop down on an unsuspecting enemy. Though I did both of these during sections I was not allowed to record, so just take my word on that. I played on normal difficulty and found that the stealth was surprisingly strict. Enemies aren't entirely stupid, and if they think they saw even a glimpse of you, they will start investigating. This was a very poor thing to do considering I only had so much time to play the game, but I spent a decent chunk of my demo just replaying the same base trying to get that perfect run where I killed everyone without being noticed. Stealth does allow you to one-shot everyone, but not by default. In my case, I chose to keep the setting off, meaning some higher-ranking enemies needed to be fought, of which there are usually 1 or 2 per encounter. I like keeping this setting on because it is the default and thus the intended way to play the game, and because I find it makes stealth more interesting. When there is one enemy that can't be taken down, I have to plan around that and make sure that I thin the numbers around them so that when I finally do engage in combat and they call for help, no one shows up. I will maintain that I think this makes stealth more fun, but I do understand how it can impede upon the power fantasy, and thus I appreciate the option. Enemies can be marked from any vantage point, abandoning the usual bird as a means of scouting, and I think this too makes stealth more enjoyable. Part of what makes the parkour so useful is that it allows us to get on a vantage point and survey an area. An eagle doesn't make a ton of sense, and honestly, fails at streamlining a process that doesn't always need to be streamlined. I may be speaking too soon with this, because when looking at the game as a whole, 4 hours isn't that long, but the stealth felt generally challenging but fair, and I felt right at home with it. There were so many opportunities for distractions, lures, and when you're spotted, there's some ways to try and save the run through something like a red barrel, though that did backfire more than once. I liked how dynamic stealth was, I liked how fluid it all felt, and I liked for a second game in a row, having the assassin fantasy fulfilled at a deeper level than simply iconography. There are a ton of different costumes for you to use too, and while I can't show it, you can bet your ass there's an in-game store ready for launch. And you can bet that I gave my demoist a hard time about it. I'm sorry, man. The outfits I used look good, but I don't know if I'll be able to find them in the open world, or if I'll need to shell out $7 on top of the game I already bought. I know microtransactions have been in Assassin's Creed since Black Flag, and the truth is, it's been horseshit since then, and we can leave it behind. Microtransactions that complete collectibles for you or otherwise skip things in the game, I don't have a problem with it, though I'm not sure why you'd buy them. And hey, I don't even mind the XP boosters if they're handled like they are in Odyssey, where it's never really needed to actually progress. But the cosmetics in a full-priced game suck a lot, and we're better than this, guys, come on. Now there is one detail I noticed with the costume, but I want to talk about the story first, and you'll see why. I played the opening and then a questline in the middle of the game. Because of that, there's still a lot of context missing from the story, so it's hard to see how the grander narrative is, but generally, the story seemed pretty solid, and I was easily able to get engaged with that story. I do think some of Naoe's dialogue especially is a bit stiff. I'll show a clip here, but otherwise it's perfectly fine so far.
Lord Yukinaga, you look troubled.
Naoe, you remember that smell, yes? When Lord Hideya was taken.
I remember that scent. I'm hoping it might lead us to the young Lord Hideye. Tell me more about it.
It's hard to nail down because with gameplay, I can see all the individual parts moving together even if for only a few hours. But with the story, I only get a small glimpse, and can't see how the different aspects of it contextualize what we played and what we're seeing. There is a canon mode this time around that takes all the dialogue and story choices out of the game, which I did use and felt that it was seamless. I couldn't immediately tell when watching something if there was meant to be a choice there or not, and I think it's great for the lore purists who don't read the books. Also, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I was actually interested in the modern day plot. I have no idea how they pulled that off, but good job. Cutscene wise, I will say it was quite good and felt much more dynamic than Valhalla, but I don't feel right talking too much about it. However, I have a theory, and I'm so confident in this, that I'm gonna put a spoiler warning on screen, so skip ahead if you do not want to be spoiled. As I was looking through the different outfits for Yasuke, I saw that he had a really interesting armor set. And you notice anything weird about that? Yeah, I think Yasuke might be a Templar. This makes me think that perhaps Yasuke is helping the Templars without knowing it, and thus upon finding out that he had been helping the whole time, a conflict between him and Naoe will ensue. Or, Yasuke and Naoe begin working together once Yasuke sees something that makes him turn his back on the Order, and he begins operating like a double agent to help Naoe. I'm not sure if that truly is the case, but I think there is a high likelihood that Yasuke is a Templar, because it would explain why he has virtually no assassin qualities. So, overall, I'm not only more excited for the game, but I'm growing more impatient too. I don't feel comfortable advising you on pre-ordering the game because again, 4 hours is not a lot of time, but I personally am. But take that with a grain of salt because it's Assassin's Creed, I'm buying it no matter what. So now, I want to transition into the Q&A, where assuming I can, I'll answer the questions you guys left in response to this tweet, so let's go. Which Assassin's Creed does the combat feel more like? It's an RPG game when it comes to the combat, very, very similar to Valhalla. Peak? Yeah, it's pretty peak. With nearly 2 months remaining, do you think the optimization is at a satisfactory level? I think the game is far more optimized and polished than Star Wars Outlaws, and there were still some animation issues or things like trees clipping through a bridge, but I'm hoping that's ironed out by launch. It was clear that the game needed the delay and has benefited from it. Does it paint a hopeful future for the series? I think it does. This feels like one of the best Assassin's Creed games in years, and if the rest of the game is up to the same quality standard, then I think the future's bright. Is it worth playing for someone who's more of a fan of the earlier games, or is it just more Origins and Mirage style? I think if you dislike the RPG games, this will not change your mind. If you liked both the new and old formula, you'll like this plenty. Does the parkour still have that little delay before a jump? I got bad news for you. Are they still weirdly ignoring the namesake of the series like the other RPG games? I'm assuming this is in reference to actually playing as an assassin and containing the gameplay and iconography associated with it, and if that is what you mean, then I think it's definitely feeling like an Assassin's Creed game by those standards. Is it like a Spider-Man 2 situation for switching characters? Yeah, pretty much. However, when fast traveling, you can swap at the same time, which is super convenient. Thoughts on the whole ordeal with Denuvo being installed with the game to monitor your RAM? Personally, I hate Denuvo because it always makes me, an honest paying customer, have a worse experience than somebody who steals a product. If it was exclusive to Ubisoft, I'd make a bigger stink about it, but I'm also fighting a losing battle on this one. It seems like every AAA game does it. Do the cities have life? Is there a weather system or at least decent rain? I wasn't able to see the different seasons, which sucked because I'm so looking forward to the snow, but the weather system seemed standard and the cities definitely felt pretty alive, and I appreciated just waltzing through them. Most of the other questions were either things I indirectly answered in the first part of the video, or were subjective enough that I can't comfortably answer it. Things like, is the story good? Like, I don't know, that's kind of a loaded question. So, there you have it. That's everything I can talk about regarding Assassin's Creed Shadows. I'm once again grateful to Ubisoft for letting me take part in this, especially because there's a video on Patreon where I complain about Watch Dogs Legion for an hour, and I'm grateful to you guys for watching my videos and supporting me. Without you sharing my stuff and giving me this platform, I'd never have the opportunity to do any of this stuff. So thank you so much, and know that I have communicated community concerns to Ubisoft to the best of my ability, so that platform you've given me does not go to waste. Are you excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows? Why or why not? Will you be pre-ordering it? Let me know down below, and if you have any questions that weren't answered here, feel free to ask them and I will answer it to the best of my ability. Thank you all for everything, I love you guys, and have a good one.
I wish I could travel to far off places for fun. I think living on a ship would be exciting.
I love guard duty. I mean, we just stand around bossing people we don't like.